Thanks for joining me. We've got a fun topic ahead of us today. We're going to be talking about what weight, type, and brand kettlebell to buy. So stay tuned. We're going to get started in just a moment. Let me make sure that we're live here and people are able to see me. Let me know if you can hear me. Okay, so today's topic, how to choose the kettlebell type, weight, and brand to buy. This can be quite overwhelming, especially if you're new to kettlebell training and you don't know what to look for. There are different styles of kettlebells out there, and we're going to talk about that today. We're going to talk about what to look for in terms of all these things, specifically if you're a complete beginner, but I'm also happy to answer questions and give tips for those who are perhaps already have kettlebells or maybe looking to upgrade or add to their collection or switch the type of kettlebell that you have. So, as always, leave your questions in the chat. Please be respectful or you will be blocked immediately. Okay, so let's get into this. We're going to start off with the types of kettlebells. And I have some examples for you here. So, in general, there are two main styles of kettlebell that you can buy. Okay, so these are cast iron kettlebells, which will look a little something like this, and competition style kettlebells, which are going to look more like this. So these two weights here, these are the same weight kettlebell. Both of these kettlebells are 8 kilograms or 18 pounds. They're a different style. Okay, so cast iron kettlebells, this is probably a more common type that you're going to see. The cast iron kettlebell changes in size and the handle size changes depending on the weight. So with a smaller kettlebell like this, an 18 pound, the bell is smaller and the handle itself is smaller. I don't currently have an example up here for you. I should have brought probably a heavier one. But as the weight of the kettlebell gets heavier, this bell gets bigger and the handle gets bigger as well. Versus a competition style kettlebell is the same, exact same dimensions regardless of weight. So for example, I do have a different size to show you here. These two weights, I might need to lower my camera down, but these two weights are the exact same size, but this one is 8 kg and this one is 12 kg. So there's a difference in weight there of about 8 pounds, but you can't tell the difference in terms of their shape and size. Really the only difference you can see here is the color, and the color denotes what weight they are. So often cast iron kettlebells like this one will either just be completely gray or black colored, or like this one has, they'll have a little circle indicating the color. But otherwise you have to know it by reading what it says on the back of the weight there. Versus with competition kettlebells, all competition kettlebells are color coded. Now there is a standard color coding that most manufacturers follow, but not all of them. So usually 8 kg or 18 pounds is pink, 12 kg or 26 pounds is blue, a 16 kg or 35 pound will be yellow, 20 kg, 44 pound will be purple, 24 kg, 53 pound will be green, 28 is orange, and 32 is red. But again, not all manufacturers follow this. So the main difference there between those cast iron and competition kettlebells is that the size changes on the cast iron, and on the competition, it stays the same regardless. Okay, so there's pros and cons to both of those things, and we'll talk about that a little bit more as we go on. Now there are other types of kettlebells besides just cast iron or competition kettlebells. And I refer to these as sort of the cheap category. So they're the ones that you might find at Walmart, at some sporting goods stores. You'll find them on Amazon. Sometimes they have either a plastic coating or the whole kettlebell is plastic itself. Some of those can work okay. It's not what I would recommend long term. And again, I'll touch upon this more as we go through the conversation. Hi, Fabian. Thanks for joining. Let me know if you have any questions on kettlebells. Okay, so let's talk a little bit more about different types on the kettlebell front. Okay, so something else that is different between different types of kettlebells is whether they are hollow cast or solid cast. So I'm going to give you an example of a hollow cast kettlebell. This kettlebell here has a hole in there, and so it's hollow inside, and then they fill it in from the top down depending on the weight of the kettlebell, because remember, these competition kettlebells are the same size regardless of weight. This is an 18-pound. Notice it's not pink, it was spray painted orange. So it's not a 28 kg. And as the kettlebell gets heavier, they'll fill this in more. Now, why is that? Why do they do that? Well, it actually makes for a better feel of the kettlebell. It feels less heavy. If a kettlebell is solid cast, I do have one up here. So this kettlebell here is a competition bell, but you'll notice there's no hole in the bottom, so it's solid cast. What sometimes happens with these, like what has happened with this one, you might be able to hear it. I don't know if you can hear that, but there's loose stuff inside. So sometimes with these hollow cast kettlebells, the stuff that's in there, filling it in, can get loose and will move around, and it's kind of annoying. Like, it makes a sound and it can feel not great. So that's kind of a downside to it being solid cast. Now, all cast iron kettlebells are also solid cast, but they don't seem to have that same issue where stuff flies around inside of them, because they're just solid. And that's why they're different. Why the bell is different sizes for the cast iron versus the competition. They're all the same. Okay, so going to do a quick block here. Okay, so then, so you have, all cast iron is solid cast, and then for competition kettlebells, they can either be hollow cast or solid cast. So both of them are okay. As you can probably tell, I prefer the hollow cast. We also have a different style kettlebell, the Pro kettlebell. This is a newer style of competition kettlebell that has just an open bottom. So this is another version of a hollow cast, except they've made it so that you can like grip the bottom, but also so you can put in a magnetic plate, like they have these 2K chips, 2 kilogram chips, that you can add into the kettlebell and actually make your kettlebell like an adjustable kettlebell. So then that's kind of another difference you have there. And then there's for the cast iron kettlebells, you don't get to choose your handle size. It's just whatever handle size it comes with. And again, as the kettlebell gets heavier, the handle gets bigger and thicker as well. I wish I had like a 200-pound kettlebell up here to show you, but I don't have one of those. But if you've ever seen a 200-pound kettlebell, which do exist, it's a cast iron kettlebell most of the time, and it's got this just ginormous handle. But with competition kettlebells, there's different size of handle. So usually the standard is 35 millimeters, but sometimes there will be 33 millimeters. So for example, I believe this one here is a 35 millimeter versus, trying to find, I think this one I showed you before is a 33. So it's just slightly thinner. You can't really tell the difference. So the only reason why that handle difference might matter for you is if you're a kettlebell sport athlete. If you're a kettlebell sport athlete, it can make a big difference if you're doing a 10-minute set, whether your handle's 35 or 33, depending on what you've trained with. So that's where that would be most important. If you're looking to buy a kettlebell for general fitness, the size of the handle in terms of 33 versus 35 doesn't matter too much. But I do want to mention that that's a difference, because that is something that you might see. Another thing that you might come across is something called a powder coat kettlebell. A powder coat is essentially just a covering over a cast iron kettlebell. So I actually think this is a powder coat kettlebell right here. So you can actually see that some of it has kind of scraped off. Okay, so it's essentially changes the texture a little bit. It's supposed to make it more durable and less likely to rust and things like that than if it didn't have the covering over it. So usually I think those are going to be a little bit more expensive to get a powder coat versus just a cast iron kettlebell. So let's talk a little bit about why might you buy a competition kettlebell versus a cast iron kettlebell versus a cheap kettlebell, okay? So a competition kettlebell is the most versatile and comfortable kettlebell that you can buy. However, it's more expensive. So the competition kettlebells, any style of competition kettlebell you get, you can use it for any style of kettlebell training, including kettlebell sport, including hardstyle, including kettlebell solo, kettlebell partner passing, kettlebells for fitness, CrossFit, whatever you do with them, competition kettlebells are great. One of the reasons I love competition kettlebells and prefer them over cast iron is for that reason I said earlier, that the cast iron kettlebell changes size depending on the weight, which means when you have a very light kettlebell like this, it's teeny tiny, okay? It's hard to do a lot of things with this. Like, my hands aren't huge, but like you can tell like the handle's a little bit small for my hands. If you're a large man or if you're a woman who has larger hands, this is not going to be great for most exercises. This is, I believe this is a 4 kg or 9-pound kettlebell. Now, if you want to guess how heavy this kettlebell is here, well, it's actually the same weight. Okay, so this is also 4 kg or 9-pound. However, this kettlebell can be used for a lot more things, and it's a lot more comfortable. And that light of a kettlebell is definitely useful if you're a beginner. It's actually the weight that I recommend for people who start kettlebell solo training, which is what I teach. I teach classes and programs in kettlebell solo style. It's the best for beginners, and I recommend either a 4 kg or 6 kg kettlebell to start. Now, I don't like people to get a cast iron because they end up being puny like this, and they're not super usable for a lot of different moves. So that's why I prefer competition kettlebells, because you can use them for a wide range of things, and since they are that standard size, it just makes it easier to use them for any move that you want to do. So that's my personal preference. Now, why might you buy a cast iron kettlebell, which we own a lot of cast iron kettlebells also. So we have mostly competition kettlebells, but we also have a number of cast iron kettlebells, which are great. And you can absolutely use cast iron kettlebells for kettlebell solo or most styles of kettlebell training. Now, it's a little less versatile because this kettlebell won't work as well for you for kettlebell sport. Again, for similar reasons with regards to the light kettlebell being tiny. In kettlebell sport, it's an endurance sport, so you want to build endurance with a lightweight first and foremost. So again, a competition kettlebell would be better. However, if you're training with kettlebells for fitness, cast iron is going to be a less expensive way to go. Okay, so this is going to be a lot less expensive than buying a full set of competition kettlebells. So these are still great kettlebells. You can still use them for most things. And again, if your goal is fitness, this is a great kettlebell as well. Now, why might you buy like a cheap plastic kettlebell? Okay, I don't think I have one to show you because I don't own one. In general, I would only recommend that style of kettlebell if you're not sure about kettlebell training, okay? You're new to kettlebells, you're not sure if it's gonna work for your body, you're not sure if you're gonna like it. Buy a cheap kettlebell, you can upgrade later, okay? The cheap kettlebell, you can use it for a lot of things. It's not gonna be quite as durable, but you can still use it for a lot of stuff, so it's a good way to kind of get your feet wet, just buy something cheap and test it out. Now, there are some other different types of kettlebells out there. For example, adjustable kettlebells. Hi, Andy, thanks for joining. Adjustable kettlebells, that's a way that a lot of people like to go, and there are different styles of adjustable kettlebells that are different shapes. There's like competition kettlebells that are adjustable, or ones that have a totally different shape altogether. Again, it depends on what your goal is with it. One thing I think you want to make sure of if you go with an adjustable kettlebell, like it can be useful so you don't have to buy multiple kettlebells. That being said, some brands are a bit cumbersome to change the weights. So if you need to change weights quickly or within a workout, you're gonna use like 4 different weights. It's a little bit annoying if it's, takes several minutes to change the kettlebell weight each time. So you may wanna have like 2 adjustable kettlebells, or that may be a reason to get something that is not adjustable. As far as adjustable goes, I don't have any adjustable kettlebells, so I am not an expert on adjustable kettlebells, but I'm gonna drop a review in the comments from Garage Gym Reviews that I think is a useful, I dropped it through a Kettlebell Solo there by accident, but it's a useful review to look at if you're trying to get an adjustable kettlebell. He has some good thoughts on what the best adjustable kettlebells are. It says from 2023, but I think a lot of it still applies. So check that out. Okay, so one other type of kettlebell I want to show you is this bionic body kettlebell. So this is a cool kettlebell because it's shaped kind of like a competition kettlebell, but it has kind of this like leather on the outside, and it is way, way cheaper than a competition kettlebell. So this is a bell, I actually don't personally use it that much, but I recommend it to kettlebell solo students because it has that larger handle. They do have like 10-pound kettlebells, and they're all larger like this in the same size with a big handle. So they're more convenient to use for a lot of different types of lifts than some of the lighter cast iron kettlebells with the teeny tiny handles. So they sell this on Amazon, Bionic Body. All the links to the different kettlebells I'm going to mention today are in the description for this video, so you can check them out there. Hey, YouTube Punk, thanks for joining. Yeah, you did mention before you have a Bells of Steel adjustable. I don't have a ton of experience with Bells of Steel, but I have heard that people like the Bells of Steel adjustable bell. Hi, Ariovaldo. Sorry if I'm saying that incorrectly. Thanks for joining. Let me know if you guys have questions so far on different types of kettlebells, because we're going to move on to what weight to buy after that. So if you guys have questions on competition kettlebells, cast iron kettlebells, adjustable kettlebells, cheap kettlebells, let me know. Yeah, so it sounds like it takes a bit to adjust your Bells of Steel. Do you have to like unscrew the bottom and then like take plates in and out? That's kind of what I've seen before as far as different adjustable competition kettlebells. Okay, so what weight to buy? As a beginner to kettlebells, I generally recommend that you start with 5 to 20 pounds, especially if you're new to strength training altogether. And depending on what your goals are, this may vary. So it's hard to give a blanket statement of what weight you should start with, because it also depends on where you're starting from, what's your fitness level, what style of kettlebell training are you going to do? Are you going to do kettlebell sport? Are you just training for fitness? Are you doing hard style? You really want to build up your strength? So that's going to vary, and it varies on where you're starting from. But in general, 5 to 20 pounds is a safe place to begin. It is best to master your form first before you go up in weight. Okay, it's best to take your time setting a solid foundation. It's always best to err on the side of a lighter kettlebell than a heavier one. I know so many people who start with like a 35-pound kettlebell and then find they're not able to do a lot of the moves with them, and then they have to go back and buy a lighter one. It's never a bad thing to have a lighter kettlebell. Even when you're more advanced, there's always technique you can go back and work on with your light kettlebell. So it's never a waste of time or a waste of money to have a light kettlebell, and it's best to set that foundation and allow your joints, tendons, ligaments to adapt over time versus really trying to push the weight early on. Okay, so then, specifically for kettlebell solo, which is a style of training that I teach follow-along classes and programs for, we recommend using a light kettlebell for like the first 4 months, because our programs and our exercises are progressive regardless of the weight you use. Like if you use a light weight, the exercises still change in stance and variation that make them more challenging. You actually want to stay with that light kettlebell for at least 4 months and give yourself a really solid foundation to adapt to the exercises. If your budget allows, I do recommend buying 2 to 3 kettlebells. So perhaps you buy a kettlebell in the range of 4 to 8 kilograms, which is between 9 and 18 pounds. Okay, maybe you buy one of those. That's your light bell to start with. Maybe you also invest in one that's 10 to 12 kg. So that's like 22 to 26 pounds. And then a third one that's between 16 and 20 pounds, or 35 and 44 pounds. It's good to have a range of kettlebells available so that as you progress in strength, you have those there. And some exercise you may progress in strength faster than others. Some kettlebells, as I mentioned, like the Pro Kettlebell, have these 2-kilogram magnetic chips that you can place up into the kettlebell, and you may be able to skip getting a certain kettlebell size because you have those chips, and it allows you to adjust the kettlebell that you do have. As I mentioned, it's kind of hard for me to give you an exact weight that you should get, but if you guys have questions on that based on your specific fitness level or your goals, let me know in the comments. I'd be happy to share my thoughts on what weight kettlebell I think would be best for you to start with. That's my general recommendation on that. Okay, let's talk about kettlebell brands. Okay, and if anybody has favorite kettlebell brands already, or ones you're thinking about getting, drop them in the comments. Let me know what they are. So there are tons of kettlebell brands out there, especially these days. There's so many different brands of kettlebells. It could be really overwhelming and hard to know what to pick. Like, I would not want to go out there and be having to choose a kettlebell for the first time online right now, because it is confusing and hard to know. And what I'm going to share with you on this, this may vary depending on what country you're in. So this is probably going to be most relevant to you if you're in the USA. If you're in a different country, then it might be different. Like if you're in Asia, where you're going to get your kettlebells and what brands you're going to have access to is going to be very different from what you have access to here in North America. Okay, so first of all, a lot of the cast iron and competition kettlebells out there are made in the same factories in China. So most of them are not that different from each other. They often use a similar or even the same mold. That's why you'll see some brands that like their shape just looks very, very similar. I don't know for sure that that's the case, but I have heard that over the years, and some of them are close enough in shape and size that you're like, okay, that almost looks exactly the same, so it's likely, not very, very different. One brand that I want to shout out that is very different is the Pro Kettlebell. Okay, so these are made in the USA. This is the only competition kettlebell that I know of, you can correct me if I'm wrong in the comments, that's made in the USA. So these are really unique that way. If you like some more supporting USA goods, I do, then check out Pro Kettlebell. They are a lot more expensive than other kettlebells, but that's in part because they are doing all of their own manufacturing and they're a small business. People who own Pro Kettlebell are kettlebell lifters themselves. YouTube Punk, I see you wanting Pro Kettlebells need to take a loan first. Yes, they are expensive. Mark, you have a few kettlebells from Rogue. I don't have any, but I have used the Rogue before. Those are a nice brand to use. So as far as the material of your kettlebell, I have heard that ductile iron or steel is supposed to be the strongest material for kettlebells. That being said, unless you're planning to drop your kettlebell a bunch, probably any type of kettlebell you get that's, a cast iron or competition kettlebell is going to last you a long time. It's not something you need to be super concerned about because most kettlebells are very, very durable. But if that matters to you, looking for something like ductile iron or steel, it's going to bring the price up on your kettlebell, but there are some out there. I think Rogue maybe even has one. Simon Lee, I see you say Kettlebells USA versus Pro Kettlebells. That's the question for competitions. Simon Lee, is that currently a conversation that's happening within competitions, or are you asking which one you should use for a competition? Single cast kettlebells are also said to be more durable than kettlebells that are cast in pieces and then welded together. So for example, there's some kettlebells that are like the handles cast separately from the bell and then they weld them together versus one that's just cast in a single mold. Supposedly, the single cast kettlebells are stronger, but I don't know how to verify that. If it was welded well, it may be perfectly strong for most people's purposes, but that is something that you could, look into again if you really care about having like really, really good durability of your kettlebells. Some different brands that I like and can recommend and that I have here today. Let's see, we got Pro Kettlebell, of course. Pro Kettlebell is awesome. This is kind of like your luxury kettlebell because it is a lot more expensive. Then we have Vulcan Kettlebell. These are newer to me, but I've really been enjoying using these. They have really bright colors, which is awesome. They're also hollow cast. The handle shape is a little bit different from most competition kettlebells, but these are a lot less expensive than many of the competition kettlebell brands out there. They're comparable to like Bells of Steel, similar or maybe even a little less expensive than Bells of Steel. Bells of Steel I also recommend, although I don't have any, but they are very similar to Kettlebell Kings bells. I've seen them in person, but haven't really spent any time using them. But I recommend them because they are also a lot less expensive than many of the brands out there. Kettlebell Kings is, so Pro Kettlebell, just to mention real quick, Pro Kettlebell just has competition kettlebells, okay? Vulcan Kettlebell, I think they only have competition style ones, but they have some like competition style ones that are black that are a little bit cheaper. They're not as precise on the weight on that one, but again, for fitness purposes, perfectly fine. Kettlebell Kings is another brand that I have many kettlebells of. This is their competition kettlebell, and then I also have their cast iron kettlebells. Titan Fitness, I don't have an example of them. I don't own them either, but they are also kind of a more budget-friendly competition kettlebell. They may have cast iron, not totally sure, but they often have sales. So again, if you're looking for something a little less expensive, Titan Fitness might be one to check out. Not the best for kettlebell sport. I do believe some of their handles have like a coating on them that would make them kind of slippery. So those aren't necessarily what I'd recommend for kettlebell sport. Kettlebells USA. This is a Kettlebells USA that was painted, but this is a nice one. Okay, I really like these kettlebells. That's another good one. Aider is another one I have used in the past. I don't have one of those. Rogue, that was mentioned. Rogue makes good kettlebells. And then Bionic Body. This is a very, very budget friendly kettlebell, which again, it wouldn't work well for kettlebell sport, but if you're going for just fitness, that's a good kettlebell, and they also have lighter ones. Simon Lee, you said for myself, I own a Pro Kettlebell. I know that Kettlebells USA is on the same level. Have you tried it? I have used many Kettlebells USA kettlebell. There are, to me, they don't feel very similar to Pro Kettlebell. They are hollow cast, but the handle shape and size, not quite the same. Let me grab my Pro Kettlebell and you can see. So if you look at the shape here, it's a little bit different. Okay, and of course it's got this difference here in these contoured armrests that Pro Kettlebell has. These are supposed to make it more comfortable to sit in rack position. Okay, I don't believe it's, in my opinion, it's not necessary, but many people say they find that much more comfortable. So that would be a big difference that's on the Pro Kettlebell. The other thing, Kettlebells USA is not made in the USA. So that is a big difference there as well. Another option that you have is like buying used kettlebells on, say, Facebook Marketplace or OfferUp or something like that. That's a great budget-friendly option because sometimes people are moving and they're trying to get rid of kettlebells, or they never used kettlebells. Like they bought kettlebells during the pandemic maybe and they're selling them off. That can be a great way to get kettlebells for a good price. Yeah, Kettlebells USA is not made in the USA. They're called Kettlebells USA because they're based in the USA, but as far as I know, Pro Kettlebell is the only kettlebell made in the USA. I could be wrong, and I'm going to check and see if it says anything about it on their website, but I'm pretty sure if they were made in the USA, that would be like, right at the top of the page. It is an interesting thing because you might assume, because they're called Kettlebells USA, that they're made in the USA. And again, I could be wrong on this, but I have never seen anything that says that their kettlebells are actually made in the USA. I believe their company is in the USA. I'm checking to see if I can find anything. Yeah, it does not say anything about their kettlebells being made in the USA. So, pretty sure they're not. Yeah, as far as I know, they're not. Rogue, so I could be wrong here. I think Rogue makes cast iron kettlebells that are made in the USA, Not sure that their competition kettlebells are made in the USA. Again, I could be wrong. I could be wrong, but I'm pretty sure, and I say that because I did a review on the Pro Kettlebell and looked at some of these websites, and from what I could tell, Pro Kettlebell is the only one that's not made in, the only one that is made in the USA. And again, I'm open to being wrong. If somebody shows me, I may have missed it somewhere, so it's definitely possible. South to West asks, do most kettlebells have grips on the handle? What about sweat dripping on the handle? Is that a problem? So most kettlebells come with a protective coating on the handle. So I don't know if you can see it on this one, but it's got kind of like the handle's a little bit shimmery. It actually has a clear coat on the kettlebell handle, and then some people, depending on what you prefer, you may want to, like kettlebell sport lifters, for example, will sand that off because the handle will hold chalk better without the coating. But if you sand off the coating, it means that your kettlebell will be more susceptible to rusting. So if you're not going to be putting a lot of chalk on it for kettlebell sport, if you're using your kettlebell for fitness and it doesn't really matter if it gets a little bit more slippery after several minutes of use, then you probably don't want to take that coating off, because then you have to maintain it and, you know, sandpaper rust off of it frequently. So it may not be worth it to take it off. No, kettlebell handles I wouldn't say that they have grips on them. Different kettlebells have different textures. Like again, for example, this kettlebell, the handle's very smooth. This has like no grip. It's very smooth. So if you were to try to use this for a longer set, your hands would probably get sweaty. But again, if you're not doing many minutes of a time holding onto the kettlebell, you could just put a little chalk on your hands, liquid chalk or, you know, regular chalk, and it probably would be fine. Other kettlebells, let's see. So what I really like about Vulcan is it actually, again, I don't know if you can see, but it's got this, it's got a bit of a different texture on it, and it describes how they did this. Like they shot some kind of bead onto it that created this unique texture. It feels really good. So it has some grip and texture to it that it feels really nice when you're lifting it. I haven't done a lot of sport lifting with these, so I don't know about that, but just for general fitness, even when my hands get sweaty, I feel like it's quite comfortable. These have a little bit of a coating on it, but if they get very sweaty, you are better off like cleaning them off because they can rust. So the upside of having a thick clear coat of paint on the handle is that your handle won't rust, but the downside is they'll be a little bit more slippery. So if you want the handle less slippery, you could sand it off, but then you have to maintain it over time. So just depends. Any other questions about the handle? I'm thinking of what else I want to show you guys. So Pro Kettlebell, one of the cool things about Pro Kettlebell, so I actually got these before they started putting clear coats on their kettlebell. So this actually is like raw. There's nothing on it. So I don't know if you can tell, but it is a little bit rusty because, well, just these have been outside also. I took one of them to the beach and accidentally dropped it in the ocean. If you've watched my Pro Kettlebell video, you saw that, or my Pro Kettlebell review. But now Pro Kettlebell actually offers, you can either get a clear coat or you can get it painted, like the traditional competition kettlebell colors. So that means that it's gonna be less susceptible to rust. But even these that are raw have held up pretty well. I've had them for several years. I keep them inside, but they've only rusted a little bit. So it depends on where you store them and what they're exposed, how much you sweat onto them. Kettlebell abuse. Well, it was an accident. I didn't mean to abuse it. I was kettlebell partner passing, and my partner dropped the kettlebell, so it happens. Simon Lee, you have another question. Just one last question concerning Pro Kettlebell versus Kettlebell USA, concerning the window shape and size. I wonder if the hand insertion is better on Kettlebell USA for people with a larger hand. That is a good question. You know, I did do a comparison on, I compared in the video I'm gonna drop the link to the Pro Kettlebell video I did, because the review video I did, because I think, Simon Lee, if you haven't watched that, I think you might find that useful because I compare it. I didn't compare it to the Kettlebells USA, but I compared it to like the Kettlebell King's Bell. So if you're familiar with that, I compared, like I measured the, did I measure the inside? I might be confusing this with the other review I did, but I compared the handle sizes there. I can measure it for you. You know what? I'm going to grab my measuring thing and I'm going to measure it for you. Okay, so let's measure this. Yeah, I have both the Apollo and the Atlas. So this one I was showing here is the Atlas, but the Apollo is the one that is the regular competition style kettlebell. So let's see. It's like 4 3/4 wide. And this Kettlebells USA is 5 inches wide. So actually Kettlebells USA does have it's a 1/4 of an inch wider. Now let's check out the difference in the height of the window here. Let's see, that's like a little over, almost 2.5. And that one's, yeah, it's a little bit taller as well. So this window is quite a lot, it's quite a lot wider because it's a 1/4 inch. And then there is a difference from top to bottom as well. So with this kettlebell, I mean, it's comfortable. It's comfortable. I do think this one definitely has more space. So it may feel a little better. Again, it also depends on your hand insertion, how you like to hold the bell, but it's definitely bigger. So hopefully that helps you, Simon Lee, in figuring out which one to get. Let me know if you have any other questions there, if you want to see anything else with regards to the USA versus the Pro Kettlebell. Yeah, the wide base on the Pro Kettlebell is nice. That is one of the really cool features of the Pro Kettlebell is that it has that wide base and you can easily, you know, like balance on there. It's not going anywhere. Even with the lighter weight, I mean, they have a 4 kg Atlas, I believe. I don't have one. This is a 8 kg, but I feel like it's very stable, even with a light kettlebell, versus, you know, any of these regular competition kettlebells. There's definitely like more movement happening if you're putting your weight on them. So that's a great feature. I also think it's kind of cool that you can you could do like upright rows using this kind of grip, or you can like do squats holding on to it this way because of that open bottom. So it's definitely got some unique things to it. Are those unique features worth paying a premium? Again, that's going to depend per person. So it's not necessarily the first kettlebell I would recommend if somebody is on a budget or concerned about how much money they're going to spend. You're welcome, Simon. Okay, Mark asked, the Pro Kettlebell has that bump out for your arm. Do I like that, or does it not matter? It's a good question. So I talk about this in my review that I did because this has been done before. If anybody is familiar with World Kettlebell Club or Valery Fedorenko, he used to sell kettlebells and he made what he called a women's kettlebell that was a women's competition kettlebell that the bell was smaller and it had these little indents. I think actually he put the indents on both the women's and the men's kettlebell. But this has been done before. I wasn't a huge fan of it then. It actually, because that bell, the bell was smaller and like denser, and because of that indent, it felt like it put more pressure on my wrist. So back then with that World Kettlebell Club, Valery Fedorenko kettlebell, I didn't like it. This feels quite comfortable to me. This doesn't feel the same to me as those WKC Valery Fedorenko where it like hurt to just sit in rack position. That being said, I don't train kettlebell sport anymore, so I can't vouch for how this feels for a 10-minute set. I've never done a 10-minute set with it. I think that this indent can make it quite comfortable, maybe more comfortable for some people, but I think it's more of a luxury than a necessity, which is what I said in the review, because if you're holding this kettlebell, just any other kettlebell, in the rack position correctly, you should have the bell of the kettlebell is not sitting, it's not pressing into your forearm because the way your hand is in it, it shouldn't be digging in anyway. So I don't think it's essential. I don't mind it on this kettlebell. I think it's a cool kettlebell. I think it looks cool, but I don't think it's necessary for lifting. But there may be other sport lifters out there that disagree with me and love it and feel that it's better for them. Simon, it looks like you say it's very comfortable and that it's, yeah, YouTube Punk, that it's ergonomic. Yeah, I don't know if it's ergonomic. Again, I haven't done a ton of snatching with it. What I love using this Atlas kettlebell for kettlebell solo, because we do a lot of like around the leg or figure 8 type exercises where this smaller Atlas kettlebell, that's still a competition shape with a larger handle, but the bell itself is smaller, so it makes it like easier to maneuver through the legs, and I really like that about it. So it's actually a kettlebell I really like to use for the training I do now. It feels nice for swings. I've done juggling with it. I've done kettlebell partner passing with it. It's well balanced. You might think with these indents that like, oh, it's going to flip funny. No, it flips good. It works very well. Yeah, it does look kind of like a pig's snout. That's true. Any other questions that you guys have specifically on the Pro Kettlebell? The other thing that's nice is the Pro Kettlebell, for their Atlas kettlebell, they sell a 4 kg kettlebell, which I really like, because a lot of kettlebell brands, competition kettlebell brands, don't sell the lighter kettlebell competition bells, which I love. I love this 4 kg competition kettlebell. This is a Kettlebell Kings. Unfortunately, they're often out of stock of these, so that's the downside on their light kettlebells. But they also have, shoot, that's the danger of having a lot of kettlebells laying around. They also have a 6 kg kettlebell, so I really like this one as well. Those are really nice ones by Kettlebell Kings. Simon, you said it's the only thing that you've owned, so you can't compare. Yeah, you know what? If it's only one you've owned, I think that's a good one to have. And if you're competing, I do think it's important to figure out what type of kettlebell you'll be competing with. If you're not competing in kettlebell sport, then I think it doesn't really matter so much. I think you get the kettlebell you like, and either get more to try later or just keep going with the ones you have. You know, most of these kettlebells will last forever. You don't need a ton of them. I have way more kettlebells than I ever use, so you really don't need to have a ton. You can do a lot with just one kettlebell or several kettlebells. Other questions on types of kettlebells, brands, or what weight kettlebell to use? Let me know in the comments. Now, this is a topic that people are frequently asking about, so I want to make sure to answer your questions. So let me know if you have anything specific. Yeah, YouTube Punk, you said your thought is that ergonomic is good for people learning the rack and clean. Yeah, I guess there's perhaps the argument that it'll help you get your arm in the right place. I just don't know if it will necessarily help, or it will just hurt more when people put it in the wrong place initially, because yeah, it can be challenging to get that positioning of the rack position when you're first starting. So I don't know, it might hurt more when you're in the learning phase, having this, like if this thing smacks onto your wrist. Again, I don't know, because I haven't coached anyone with this kettlebell. I already know how to clean and snatch, so it's a little bit difficult to know. But be curious to hear if anybody has any thoughts on that or has feedback on whether they learned cleans or snatches with them. Simon, your question is, since how long have I been involved with kettlebell training? I started lifting kettlebells in 2011, so it's been about 13 years at this point. L. Hun, your question is, what weight would you suggest for kettlebell swings for a female beginner? My first question for you would be, have you done other kettlebell exercises before the swing? Because I wouldn't recommend starting with the swing. It's just a greater risk of injuring yourself. It's not really a beginner movement. So I would recommend starting with like more basic exercises like squats, deadlifts, around the body handoffs, thigh rainbows, and using a 5 to 10 pound kettlebell to start with. Luke Morton, you said you never bother with kettlebells. They always intrigue me. Thinking about getting some for side lateral raises. That's kind of funny because I was just talking to a student the other day about kettlebells, dumbbells, different types of weights. And one of the only thing I was like, there are some exercises that are better done with a dumbbell, like a lateral raise. I wouldn't really recommend doing a lateral raise with a kettlebell. It's not the best tool for the job. I think there's probably other exercises better suited to a kettlebell, in my opinion. Wayne, you said, can I do double kettlebell work with different weights? Are you asking, Wayne, whether you could use like an 8 kg in your right and a 12 kg in your left? Is that what you mean by using different weights with double kettlebells? Yeah, so you can do that. I have seen different coaches who talk about that. I've tried it before. I would not recommend it as a beginner. If you're like intermediate or advanced, you have quite a good base level of strength, you can do it. I wouldn't recommend a huge gap. So the largest gap you should likely do is maybe 4 kg. Once a gap gets too large, I think it's just asking for, moving a little bit funny or kind of tweaking something. So it depends also like what's your goal with it, but you can do it, and I would just be cautious about how big of a difference there is between the two kettlebells, and make sure you have a solid foundation before you try that. You're welcome, El Hun. YouTube Punk, is that a question? Are you asking if kettlebells are good for ballistics? Yeah, Wayne, you said you have a 16 and a 20. I would more recommend that difference for exercises like a deadlift or a squat. You could do it for like cleans or clean and press, but again, I think it's a little bit riskier and maybe not necessary. I feel like working either just like a unilateral with a different weight or just doing doubles with the same weight, you can do it. Yeah, just being cautious with the difference there and seeing how it feels. Yeah, YouTube Punk, you're saying kettlebells are better for ballistics versus lateral raises. Yeah, I think they're better for certain dynamic exercises, and there's certain exercises like where you're switching hands or swinging the kettlebell around your body, like an around the body handoff. You could maybe do it with a dumbbell, but it just wouldn't work as well. Same with a swing or, farmer's carries. You could, of course, do farmer's carries with dumbbells. I just think they're more comfortable with kettlebells. You're welcome, Wayne. Thanks for your question. You guys have other questions about kettlebell weights, kettlebell types? And it is Thursday, which means this is my last live for the week. So if you guys have requests for next week's lives, let me know, because I'm trying to brainstorm what lives I'm going to do next week. I do still have some suggestions from previous weeks, but haven't picked any yet. I do have on the list a jerk tutorial or a windmill tutorial, so probably we'll do one of those. I did have some requests for doing another meal prep. I don't think I'm going to do that this weekend, but maybe sometime in the next few weeks. Somebody had a question about kettlebell rack position, so if that's something that you would like to see, let me know. YouTube Punk, are you saying you can't do swings? I'm not sure what your comment is. Any other suggestions on what you guys would like to see about kettlebells next week? Any other tutorials or exercises that you're having trouble with? We did a snatch tutorial earlier this week. The week before we did a swing tutorial. So if you haven't taken a look at those yet and you need help with your swings or snatches, be sure to check those out. For anybody who's watching who is completely new to kettlebell training, I want you to check something out. I have a 7-day kettlebell jumpstart that's great for beginners. It's 7 days of like a 10 to 15 minute workout each day. All you need is one light kettlebell. The moves are really simple, really basic. So if you're new to kettlebells, be sure to check that out. YouTube Punk, I know you're talking about the U-turn handoff. Is that what you're talking about? It may be a mobility issue if you have trouble with that. So there's, in kettlebell solo style of training I teach, we do something called a U-turn handoff. So it's behind the back. This can be a tough one for some if you struggle with shoulder mobility. So if this is a hard one, you can always switch it for an A-turn handoff. Okay, similar idea, just in front of the body, easier on your mobility, and work on your mobility. So work on your handcuff position. Okay, so working on being able to straighten out the arms and squeeze the shoulders together, maybe doing that daily as a warm-up or cool down, or just a morning stretch. If you can't clasp your hands, grabbing like a towel or a yoga strap and then stretching it out, that's going to help you with being able to have that mobility to reach behind you. So that is a tough one. You can always sub it out for the A-turn and while you work on your mobility to help improve that. Yeah, it's definitely going to be like a shoulder. Your pecs might be tight, so stretching pecs can be helpful. Like if you tend to have forward rounded shoulders, I definitely do from all the years of kettlebell sport, like doing stretches where you work on opening up your pecs would be a good idea for that as well. So and this one will help, but it may be hard to do if your pecs are really tight. So again, using a towel and going out wider, but also you could like place your arm on a wall and then push into that and open up and stretch. That's a great one for your pecs to help you with that as well. Any other questions that you guys have for me today on kettlebells, types of kettlebells, brands, weights, or suggestions for next week? Because otherwise, I'm just going to pick. I think I've showed you. You're welcome. There's one more kettlebell I'm going to show you guys, so don't go away. It's very cool. You've never seen a kettlebell like this. Totally unique, completely unique. Completely awesome. It's a mirror finish. This is a pin bell, like a pinball, except a pin bell. So, yeah, pretty cool. So my partner made this kettlebell, so I think it's actually a Perform Better kettlebell initially, but he smoothed it out and it got chrome plated, one of a kind. Let me know your bid on this kettlebell. Mark has a question here. Starting out with kettlebells, you say to start with a lightweight. If it's too light, like 5 pounds, might feel like I'm not making any progress because it's so light. Is that wrong thinking? Mark, tell me how have you done strength training before? Have you been working out regularly, or are you new to exercise and strength training? Let me know. I can give you a better answer if you let me know that, because I do think, again, I give a range. So I say 5 to 20 pounds. This is going to depend on like your previous experience, your size, your weight, your strength level. So some people may be able to start with a 20 or 25 pound kettlebell and it's light for them. But for many people, that's not going to be the case. And it isn't necessarily about feeling a huge burn, because part of when you first get started with strength training is about connecting your mind to your muscles. And sometimes you could go through the motions of doing an exercise, but you might not be truly connected to what's working in that exercise. And that could be just because you haven't done it. You haven't done the exercise, or you're not as connected to your body and what's working when you're doing it. So initially when you're training, it's less about like really feeling a burn or getting really sore, and more about like acclimating your body and allowing that awareness to develop so that you can more effectively do the exercises as you move forward. You set a solid foundation, and that you can get in tune with your body so you can hear messages your body's sending you. Because a lot of times people, maybe they just want to feel it, so they go too heavy too fast. It's much easier to start too light and almost like feel like you're not doing anything, but to progress over time than overdoing it. Overdoing it takes way longer to recover from. You tweak something, you injure something, it's a big setback and it may stop your momentum from going. So a principle that I teach is consistency is more important than anything else. It's more important than progressing or increasing the weight or increasing the reps, because the consistency of doing regular exercise over time is where you get the benefits. YouTube Punk, you're saying too light and you don't get feedback. Yes and no, but as a complete newbie to strength training, I think you may not be getting the feedback because the connection isn't there. So I think that's something that's important to build over time, and giving yourself the time with a lightweight, because there may be some times where you're using this lightweight and you don't really feel it in the workout, but you're sore the next day. So I think it's really important to set that solid foundation. It's something that I didn't do when I first started out with strength training and kettlebells, and I developed a lot of imbalances as a result, and things where I had to go back years later and realize I didn't actually know what I was doing with certain moves, and I created habits that were harder to break. So taking your time when you're first starting, I think, is really to your benefit. If you can be patient enough to spend some time with a lightweight and get the most you can from the lightweight before you move on. There's a lot you can get from it. It also depends like which exercises you're doing as well. With kettlebell solo, we switch our different stances. We make the exercises themselves more progressive and challenging. So there's different ways that you can challenge yourself and feel the exercise without necessarily increasing the weight. Well, a spider on my roof, you're getting blocked because this is my channel and I can yap as much as I want. Valery Fedorenko has chrome and gold kettlebells. I may have seen those at some time. You're talking about that really heavy kettlebell he has. Yeah, I have seen that before. Yep, another person here for the ban. Lots of banning happening. Any other questions that you guys have about kettlebells? Mark, that was a good question. Hopefully that answered your question. Let me know if you have any follow-up questions on that. I have moved towards the philosophy in recent years that lifting lighter more frequently is better. And if you had told me that 5 years ago, I would have said, you're full of shit. I lift 253-pound kettlebells. I'm really strong. I can't get anything from that lightweight. And I was very, very wrong because I was skipping through a lot of things and I wasn't recovering from the work that I was doing. I was always pushing heavier and had a lot of problems as a result of that, and wasn't seeing the results that I wanted to see. I wasn't really seeing a lot of muscle tone. I was kind of inflamed, like I had kind of a layer of body fat on top of my muscles. I was strong, but I wasn't really seeing the results that I wanted to see. And actually I've seen much better results from lifting easier and lighter the majority of the time, and then every once in a while challenging myself. So it is something that I recommend to try. If you've never tried it, it actually can be a very beneficial way. You don't actually have to work as hard as you think you need to get good results. In fact, when you push yourself too hard, you may actually be shooting yourself in the foot, preventing yourself from getting the results that you want to get. Yes, this is our prized kettlebell here. It's beautiful. Just holding it up here so you guys can enjoy it for a while. Yeah, it's really, like, you can literally take photos of yourself inside of this kettlebell. It is very, very cool. Oops, I got some handprints on there. I better clean that off. Yeah, one-of-a-kind kettlebell. It's the pin bell for those of you who are pinball fans. Any other questions you guys have for me before I log off today? If you got any questions, ask them now before we go. And last minute suggestions. Hi, thanks for joining. You're joining us here at the very end, but let us know if you have any questions. All right, it looks like no questions. You're welcome, El Hun. Thank you for joining. I appreciate it. Thank you guys all for being here for the live today. If you have any other questions for me, you can drop them on the replay of this video. If you have any suggestions for lives next week, let me know. I'll be going live next week on Monday at 1 p.m. Pacific time, Wednesday at 9 a.m. Pacific time, and Thursday again at 4:30 Pacific time. So I hope to see you guys there. Have a wonderful rest of your week.